What's up, good people? It's your boy Leroy McKenzie Jr. and it is another episode of the Author Showcase brought to you by JNF Enterprises and the National Black Unity News newspaper, which brings you some of the news outside of the news that you're not going to hear in those regular. You're not going to hear the regular articles aren't going to be in this newspaper that you find in mainstream newspapers. It's going to be those articles, those topics that are about us, for us, and that we need to know, including the Author Showcase, which you can see over my shoulder here, which brings you some of our countries and outside of the country too, writers, authors, just great minds, innovators, those who have taken the charge and taken on the mission of writing and bringing books to fruition, bringing their vision of being an author to fruition. And I love to read. My passion is about not just writing, because I write myself, but bringing you others who enjoy doing the same thing, talking about the same thing, and just giving your mind something to be able to think about. And tonight is going to be nothing different than our other episodes that we've had. And this is a great gentleman. We're going to get your mind right tonight. We're going to get you thinking tonight. I promise you. So I want to introduce him. And he is someone, as you can see behind him, he's an author, teacher, speaker, engineer. Y'all, I mean, he seems to be doing a lot of things. So we're going to get into a conversation about what makes him do all the things that he does and how he got into go from engineering to writing children's book. That's interesting to me. So I'd like to introduce everyone to Mr. Neil Thompson. Brother Neil, how are you?
I'm doing well, Leroy. Thank you for having me.
No, thanks for joining me tonight. I appreciate you being on our Author Showcase, or part of our Author Showcase, and our conversations with authors, because we really enjoy having these. I mean, me personally, I hope that the viewers that are listening, I believe that they do too as well. They enjoy hearing these conversations from authors, because it gives us what I call a behind the scenes with authors, because it's more than just the books. It's more than just turning the pages or going on your phone and getting the digital download, but it's about learning a little bit more about those authors that we bring on to our Author Showcase stage, and having them just tell us a little bit about their mission, their message, their movement, if they have one, and their motivation, what makes them want to write. So I thank you for coming tonight. And I'd like to start off, if you could, because I can't do it justice. I'm gonna let you introduce yourself to the people and just tell them just a little bit about who you are, your background, and then how, kind of what got you up to where you are right now. And then we'll get into our conversation about your book.
Sure. Well, I became an engineer because my father said I should. That's where it all started. I used to lie about that too, because I was rather embarrassed, because whenever I heard other people talk about why they went into engineering, there's always a way more interesting story. Maybe they played with Legos when they were a kid. Maybe they built computers, or they were in robotics club when they were in high school. I didn't do any of that stuff. I was okay at math and science, not the best, but certainly not the worst. But when I finished high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do afterwards. My father said, do engineering. And I think he suggested engineering just because of the stability of the profession. Typically, when you leave engineering school, you can find a job that pays well enough to pay back any student loans you have. But then, that's what I did. I did materials engineering for my undergrad. And then I did a master's degree because my father said I should do a master's degree. And then I started a PhD because my father said to do a PhD. But by that time, I was about 24, 25. And at some point you have to start living for yourself, not what other people want you to
Mm.
do. I certainly wasn't the same, kid going into undergrad, at 18 years old than I was at 24, 25 years old. So I left the PhD program after a year. Then I had to figure out what I was going to do. I worked as a research associate at a startup for a couple of years. And then made the move out to California, where I currently live. And I worked in spinal implants. So I worked for a lot of spine companies as a product development engineer.
Mm.
And it was really interesting because the work that I was doing was using human cadaver bone to make implants. So implants can be made out of a number of materials, ceramics being one of them, even metal. But oftentimes people don't really think about implants being made out of actual human bone. But if you're an organ donor, that's where your bones might be going, to a tissue bank to then become an implant for somebody else.
Right.
So I was one of those engineers that was designing those implants made out of those bones. I did
Okay.
that for a number of years. And that's what really led me to, I guess, what you see in the background, Teach the Geek.
Mhm.
When I was working as an engineer, I had to give presentations in front of management every month. And those first few presentations were absolutely horrendous, Leroy. I did not know it was possible to sweat that profusely from one's body while being alive. It's gross. The dry cleaning bills were ridiculous. But I noticed a lot of the other engineers, they weren't all that much better at it than I was.
Okay.
I think a big issue a lot of us had is we have all this technical expertise, but we're not the best at putting it in such a way that non-technical people can understand. Many of the management were non-technical people, CEO, VP of sales, VP of marketing. They didn't have any technical background. But if you're presenting things in a way they can't take in, what would often happen is I would get questions that I thought I had answered during the presentation. But because I didn't put it in such a way that they could understand, I'm getting these questions. I continue to sweat out of every orifice. I can't get it out of there. I can't get out of the presentation as quickly as I'd like. It was basically a waste of everybody's time. But I saw the benefit of getting better at it over time. Essentially, I didn't want to be a sweaty mess every time I had to give a presentation in front of management. Frankly, I would want to look good in front of them. And so I got a lot better at it over time by practicing, by getting feedback from others. I joined Toastmasters for a number of years. For those of you that don't know, Toastmasters, international organization whose goal is to help people with their public speaking. And essentially, I took everything that I learned in becoming more effective at communicating, specifically in front of these non-technical management audiences, and I built a course around it, and I called it Teach the Geek to Speak. So it's an online course. It's geared towards people like myself, people that work in science and engineering, typically engineers and scientists who want to improve their presentation skills. And so I did that in 2018. And then earlier this year, I launched a membership, which is now something that's a monthly membership. I wanted to offer something that was a little more support, something more ongoing than just a one-off course. Mm-hmm. And it's called the Teach the Geek to Speak Society. So in addition to people getting the course, they get access to this community and also monthly calls where they can ask their public speaking or presentation related questions. So that's one of the things that I do. A couple of former coworkers and I formed a consultancy where we help typically smaller medical device companies with their packaging projects. It's the business is called Steriliant. And the main reason for that is a lot of these smaller companies, they're focused more on developing the product, but then the packaging that the product comes in. And that's a big part of just having a product, because the packaging for medical devices is also regulated in addition to the product. So you have to make sure that the packaging is up to the international or national standards. So we work with a lot of these companies to work on their projects, on these packaging projects, since oftentimes they don't have that expertise in-house. So that's the other thing that I do. And then of course, there's my children's book. It's called Ask Uncle Neil, Why is My Hair Curly? Here it is.
Wow.
And it's about my nephew asking me why his hair is the way it is. And I use science to answer the question. The motivation for me writing the book is to encourage more Black children to consider careers in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And I use whenever I describe the motivation for the book, I'm very careful of the words I use. I truly mean it when I say I want them to consider STEM. I'm not a big fan of promoting STEM or encouraging people to go into STEM. what I want Black children to understand as early as possible, really, the book is rated for children up to 8 years old, is that there are no careers that are off limits to them. So if going into STEM, being a scientist, an engineer is something that they want to do, they can, as long as they're willing to do the work and they have the interest. But if they're interested in something else that's outside of STEM, that's a valid choice as well. As I said, I'm not a big fan of telling people to go into something simply because they're underrepresented in that something. You have to have that interest. You have to be willing to do the work, or else you won't stick. You'll leave. And so that's the main reason I wrote the children's book. Let's just letting these children know, these Black children know, that STEM, engineering, and science is not just for white people and Asians. And that's who you typically see when you go into a lot of these companies. It can be for us too. And the plan eventually is to write other books. And essentially what those other books will be is my nephew asking me a question and I use science to answer it. So those are the three things that I focus mainly on. It's Teach the Geek, my business, my other business with the medical device packaging, and then of course the children's book. And the children's book is called Ask Uncle Neil, Why is My Hair Curly?
Now, let me ask you this. How did you go from, well, I liked how you did that, but what got you interested in, right? Had you written, because you hadn't written before you decided to write this book, Ask Uncle Neil, and what prompted you to say, wow, this is something that should be put into a book? What made you kind of go from, say, hey, your nephew asking you that question to saying, wow, let me put this in a book, and it be more than just about your nephew asking that question?
Well, yeah, absolutely. My nephew is a very inquisitive kid, and he asks a bunch of questions. So why would this book be centered around hair? Well, the reason I chose that is because there are a number of books, children's books out there that are about Black people's hair, but it comes from the aspect of learning to accept your hair, or being happy you have that type of hair, learning to love your hair. And there's more than a number of books that cover that. I was never going to write that book because, I mean, to be very honest, I never had an issue with my hair. So it was never something that was on my mind, just learning to accept the hair that I have. I'm quite happy with the hair, with a little bit of hair that I still have. I'm happy it's still there. But so I knew that there could be a market for books about Black hair, but coming at it from a different vantage point, that's really what I wanted to do. And so the idea of just even trying to answer the question, why is the hair the way it is, as opposed to something like I love my hair, it just seemed rather compelling to me. I thought that even because there is this market for children's books about Black children's hair, then my book could fit in that sense, but then just come at it from a completely different direction.
Wow, and I love that, and I love, and like you said, I know that we don't want to push children into certain sectors or industries and everything like that, but I do know that the STEM industry is something that I think is a viable option, and that's what I like. I like giving kids options. Yeah, here's something that you can actually do. And then if it's an interest that they grab to, because we as kids, I mean, we remember there were things that we thought we liked, and then there were things that we gravitated to because for whatever reason we kind of liked them. I always remember growing up, I played several instruments. I played the piano, I played the trumpet, and I played the snare drums. Didn't stick with any of them. Thought I loved them at the time. And those were things that I was interested in. And still to this day, wish I had stuck with the piano and learned, and just stuck with it and actually wish I had become proficient in it and everything like that. So, because you never know what kids will gravitate to. And I think it's very innovative of you to use a children's book to talk about STEM, one, but then, like you said, to talk about hair, which is something that people don't really, don't necessarily understand, and then the science of it and goes, and how that goes into it. So, if you can talk a little bit about the book, and then if you can, with the kind of tell us a little bit about the book and what it entails, and then we'll talk about how, what we want or what you would like the children to come away with from the book.
Got you. So yeah, as I mentioned, the book's about my nephew asking me why his hair is the
Okay.
way it is, and I use science to answer it. So essentially, I had to figure that out myself because I
Okay.
didn't know the answer when he first asked me.
Really? Okay.
So really the book had a couple of motivations. I wanted to find out what the answer was myself, and then I figured once I found out that answer, why not put it in a book? Especially as I mentioned, there's this market already for books about Black children's hair, just because it's coming at it from this different vantage point. So essentially, the answer to that question, why the hair is the way it is we don't know. There are a number of theories out there as to why our hair is different than so many other people's. And when I found this out, I was a bit discouraged at first because I thought, I can't put this into a book. People are going to want to know a definitive answer. But that's the thing about science, though, that I think a lot of people don't recognize, is that oftentimes we don't come to answers right away. There has to be a lot of research that's done to eventually come to what's called scientific consensus about why something is the way it is. I mean, for the longest while, we thought the earth was flat, but then we did a lot of experimentation and a lot of work to then eventually come to the consensus that the earth is round. But if we hadn't done that work, we'd still be thinking that the earth is flat. So that's something I also wanted to impart in the book, is that science is the goal of science is to come to answers, but you don't come to those answers necessarily right away. But you can be, and if you go into STEM, you could be a part of that reasoning for figuring out why something is the way it is. So that's essentially how the book ends. It's me telling Anthony, you could be one of the people that tries to figure this out to then provide that scientific consensus. Because oftentimes when it comes to science, one group does an experiment, and then another group does the same experiment to either prove what the other group did or disprove it. And if enough people prove what that first group did, then that is what develops that scientific consensus for people to say, well, this is the way it is. So I wanted to present that type of information in an age-appropriate way, but in a way that was still interesting to read.
No, absolutely, and I love that. Now I'm asking you this. Now, once you finish the book, and you gave it to your nephew, I'm assuming, what did he tell you about the book once he finished reading the book? Did he tell you? Did you ask him anything about what he learned and what he gained from the book?
You know, what's funny about that is nobody knew that I wrote the book until I sent it to them. So
really?
My nephew did not know I wrote the book. And so the people in the book are myself, my nephew, and my sister, my nephew's mother. And I sent them a copy of the book. That's how they knew about the book. So they got this book in the mail.
Just get the book in the mail.
Got this book in the mail. He's looking like, what is this? So I got a pretty interesting call from my sister afterwards after they received
really?
that.
Okay.
Oh yeah, she was very excited about it. But yeah, my nephew was very excited about it too. He saw he was the main character of a book. He took it to school, showed it to all his friends. I mean, he must have been I think he was like 9 or 10 at the time. So he's very excited about him just being this main character of a book. So he absolutely loved it.
Now, what do you want other kids to gain from reading this after they've read the book? I know you with your nephew, because he's excited because he's in the book. But what do you want other children to gain from reading the book, or to come away with from the book after they read the book?
I want children to be okay with asking questions. And then for the parents that buy the book or get the book for their children, I want the parents to be okay with their children asking questions too. I mean, I grew up in a pretty strict home. There wasn't a whole lot of asking questions of anything. You did as you told. It's funny when we were talking about playing the piano when you were a kid. I also played the piano as a child. Not because I wanted to play the piano as a child, because I was told to play the piano as a child. And I did it for a number of years, from the age of 8 up until 17. I did it. Yeah, I did it for a number of years, like 10. We're talking almost 10 years. And the only reason and I stopped essentially when I became an adult. When I turned 18, it's like, you can't force me to do this anymore. So I'm a big fan of this, going back to your question. I'm a big fan of children questioning things. And I'm a big fan also of the parents being okay with them questioning things, because that's how you learn, especially if you want to go into something like engineering and science, specifically engineering. The engineers, that's what we do. We solve problems. How can you solve the problem before you ask the question? And so that's essentially what I want children to get out of the book, is just questioning things, and adults being okay with it, because you're trying to raise the next leaders, and they have to be able to ask questions to come to those answers.
Absolutely. Now let me ask you this. Now I asked you what you want the children to come away from the book, but what did your book teach you about you?
What did that book teach me about me?
Yeah.
Well, it taught me that I could write a book. I really didn't. I wasn't really sure about the whole process. Luckily,
Okay.
I had somebody that was helping me, and just because I self-published the book too, so I didn't go through the traditional publisher. So just figuring out that whole self-publishing process, writing the book firstly, and then finding an illustrator for the book, and then I also had to edit it to make sure that the book read well. Just putting it all together was something obviously I hadn't done before, but I was rather proud of the accomplishment of just seeing the final product of what came out of it, and just also learning about other people's, I guess, opinions about the book too. It made me really happy and motivated to write other books.
Okay. No, that's great. That's good. That's great. And I love asking that question, because so many of us as writers, we have this idea when we first start writing a book, and even like you said, when I wrote my first book, I had no idea what writing a book entailed, so I did some did the research and everything like that. But like you said, putting it together, trying to yours, the children's book, and when you use illustrations, is always a little more, there's still a lot to learn about even that, because you didn't do the illustrations yourself, right? You had to have someone to do the illustrations.
Correct.
But which means you had to talk to the illustrator to tell them what it was that you had in your head, and then them actually draw it, and make it into this illustration so that you could tell your story, and everything like that. But to be able to put those concepts together, and then to be able to have that story be told in such a way that, like you said, you get into where children can understand it, because you're talking about something that children are have to learn, the STEM that they have to learn. But what does my hair have to do with science and technology and those things and everything like that? So I like that you talked about that, and that you didn't go the traditional route, which I think we learn more when we do it that way. Because tell me this: do you have a better understanding of writing, publishing, and all that entails, when since you had to since you chose to go this, I call us authorpreneurs, since you chose to be an authorpreneur, and do it yourself?
Oh, no question. You mentioned the illustrations and the issues that you could have with just making sure that the illustrations match the words. So
Right.
what you see in the book is
Uh-huh.
actually the work of the second illustrator that I used.
Okay.
The first illustrator, the illustrations were absolutely horrendous. They were terrible. I keep them sometimes, and I kept them, and I look at them sometimes and think to myself, I almost used them, because I still paid the person the money, because they did the work, so I figured I owed them the money. But I was like, I told myself I can't use these drawings. So I looked for a second illustrator, and this person did a much better job of capturing what I really wanted the pages to look like, and even just how my nephew, myself, and my sister look. Because I sent the pictures of all three of us to the first illustrator. I don't know, maybe she didn't refer to them or what, but those pictures didn't look nothing like us. Right. But that second illustrator, she did a much better job.
Well, we'll talk about that process, even how important it is when you have to, as an entrepreneur, when you have to vet different individuals. You talked about the difference. Can you talk about that experience as a writer, and what you learned from that, and being able to have to deal with an illustrator?
Yeah, one of the things that I learned is don't pay all the money up front. pay in installments, and have certain milestones, and be okay with cutting the project short if it's not meeting your expectations. But that's not something I thought about when I first went down this path of writing this children's book. I found somebody, the first illustrator I found on Google. I saw some of their other drawings and I thought those look pretty good. So I figured she'd do a good job for me, but I don't know. Maybe she's going through something. I don't know. But her drawings just weren't up to snuff, Leroy. So I had to find the second illustrator, and the second illustrator I found on Fiverr.com of all things. And I was worried about that because I thought, Fiverr, you tend to go to Fiverr when you don't want to pay a whole lot of money. And yes, that second illustrator didn't charge as much as that first illustrator. But as I said, she did a much better job for less money, ironically. So, just being able to vet, as you mentioned, being able to vet people, and as I mentioned, using milestones instead of just paying all the money up front is definitely something that I learned and certainly will take to my second and subsequent books.
Yeah, absolutely. For authors that are watching, and those that may need graphics and stuff like that done, Fiverr is a great place to go to find a graphic designer. It's a great place to go to for any website design, for those that may need a website that you need to get done, so that you can have a landing place for your for your book and other products and everything like that. So you definitely can check out Fiverr, and that's FIVRR.com. Because it will definitely, now you want to vet them. You want to make sure that you vet the those that you use on Fiverr. They do a good job of that as well too. But taking a look at their work and the things that they do, you certainly want to be sure that you are connected with the right individual so that they can give you a quality product. Because it is your book cover is one of the keys to grabbing an audience, because that's the first thing that they look at. They're gonna look at that front cover, and they're gonna look at the back cover to read what the book is about most of the times. That's where people go to be able to kind of see whether or not they are interested in the book and if it grabs them. So that's just a tip. Neil, tell me this: how important is it, not only for STEM, and I know we talked about not gearing kids towards STEM, but to give them options, but how important is it from a literacy standpoint, getting kids to read more, and offering children's book? How important is that?
Oh, literacy is so important, Leroy. I mean, you hear so many stories about children that are in school and that don't read on grade level, and then they graduate from even high school and not reading at the appropriate levels. It makes it really difficult then to get a job anywhere. I mean, certainly STEM is one of the more difficult degrees to get, specifically engineering, undergraduate degrees. If you're not adept at reading, I mean, you're going to struggle in school. And then if you struggle in school, you're likely going to have issues working as well. I mean, just even as an engineer, you might not think there's a whole lot of reading involved, but there certainly is, especially if you don't know the answer to a problem. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of research that has to be done to figure out what that answer is. And I had to do that for this book. As I mentioned, I didn't know the answer to why the hair is the way it is. So I had to do research. I had to read to figure that out. And if you're not adept at it as a child, it's really difficult to learn those skills as an adult. Certainly, it's possible. So for those that perhaps aren't the most skilled at reading, there's certainly time. You're still alive. As long as you're alive, there's time. But developing those habits in children at as a young age, it will only bode well for them when they become adults. So I'm a big fan of children reading young in life.
Now, how do we? Because you talked about the literacy rate and being behind. What do you think are three things that we could do as a community, but then also to get kids, not only kids interested in reading, but honestly getting adults, because the average person only reads maybe 12 books a year, if that. I think, and I think it said one book a year. I think it said one. It was very low. But what do we need to do to get our children more involved in what do you think that we can do to get more involved? Does it entail getting more books like this in schools? Does it entail the family? Is it a combination of both, do you think?
Oh, well, certainly getting my book in schools is something I won't argue against. So absolutely.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely,
So there's
absolutely.
absolutely that, but I don't think it is appropriate or reasonable to expect children to read if their parents don't. You can't ask
Mm,
somebody to do something
good
that you're
point.
not willing to do yourself. So if you are insistent on your children becoming avid readers to benefit themselves, well, you better be modeling that to your children as well. Have books in the home and limit, limit TV time, even limit computer time. Have
Yeah.
time for where everybody is reading something. The adults are reading something, the children are reading something. You develop those type of habits early on, and they tend to stick. And that's why I think that's where I think it really starts. It starts in the home. I mean, people like to talk about what needs to happen in the schools, but parents are the first teachers of their children. So I don't think it's appropriate for you to expect so much from these teachers, and you as the parents aren't willing to put in the work yourselves. I mean, they are your children after all. You brought them into the world, not the teachers. I mean, who's supposed to care more about them? The teachers or you? So I mean, read. If you want your children to read, you better read.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's just important that even whether it's during the summertime, whether even when school is out, and reading just does to me, reading does so much more for our vocabulary. It does so much more for taking us play. I mean, reading can take you anywhere if you're reading different books. And one of the things that I learned, I mean, growing up in school, and one of the benefits that I had was being a part of this it's an Upward Bound program. And I think it's still around, but it's very scarcely. But one of the benefits that we had was, one, we had to read during the summer because we went to school all year round. But two, it taught us the importance of education. It taught us the importance of always learning. And like you said, we can't expect our children to be learning, always be learning, if we don't exemplify that same behavior. I think we as kids get what we get from what we see our parents do or our uncles do, like you did. Obviously, you spend time with your nephew, you talk with your nephew for him to want to even come to you. How did you do you know what prompted him to ask you about his hair being curly?
You know what? That kid just likes to ask questions of anybody, and I think because he also knew that I worked as an engineer,
Okay.
he figured that I might know the answer. And to be very honest, his mother's rather impatient, so she probably wasn't the right person to ask.
Go
She's
ahead,
the
Sean.
one, yeah, she's the one that said, "Go ask your Uncle Neil."
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. Now, what does the title Ask Uncle Neil, Why is My Hair So Curly? What does that mean to you?
Well, I called it Ask Uncle Neil as
Uh,
essentially the broader title to make sure that there could be other ones under that same umbrella. So
okay.
all the subsequent books will be Ask Uncle Neil, and then there'll be a question afterwards. So the first question just happened to be, the question is, why is my hair curly? And so the next book will be another question, then subsequently another question. There's a number of questions that can potentially be the focus of subsequent books. So that's essentially why the title is the way it is.
And I love that. I love that you left it so that you could have it wouldn't be it'll be a series, the Ask Uncle Neil series. I like that.
Ask Uncle Neil series.
I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. I love that. Now, speaking of which, so what's next for you? What do you have? Are you working on anything that you have? Is there anything that you're working on right now?
Well, yeah, there's always the idea of, well, not the idea, it was just the implementation of writing that second book. So that's definitely something that I'm working on now, kind of ruminating some different ideas on what I want the next one to be. And so that's something I'm certainly working on. And then in regards to the other things I do with for instance, with Teach the Geek, there's my podcast and YouTube channel. So I interview people, I interview engineers and scientists about the importance of speaking in front of others. I mean, engineers and scientists, we're not known as the best at communicating in front of others. I certainly was an example of that, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it's probably best that's not that way. We have interesting things to say too. And it's in our best interest to get the skills to be able to talk to others, especially decision makers, those that have authority. Because oftentimes what I found is if you're not the best at communicating with these people, then the projects that you're working on or trying to advocate for, they don't tend to get done just because you're not the best advocate for those positions or for those projects. And so it's really interesting to listen or to interview these people, because oftentimes they may have started off in one place and ended up in somewhere completely different. Those are always the most important or interesting stories that are, people that I talk to. For instance, I had a guest who was a civil engineer, then she became a lawyer, and then wow. she was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years, and now she's a personal stylist.
Oh wow.
Yeah, she just went all over the place. It's just like people from STEM all the way to personal styling. Is like, man, that's like, what does clothes have to do with engineering? But you know what? People have different interests, and they're free to follow them. I mean, look at myself. I worked in medical devices, making devices or implants out of human bone. And I wrote a children's book. Who could have written that up?
Exactly. Now talk a little bit more about the Teach the Geek and I know you said you wanted, tell us a little bit about that, and then the products and services that you have through your Teach the Geek company.
Sure. So Teach the Geek,
right? You have so books under that as well, too, correct?
Yes, I do. Yes, you do your research. Yes, I absolutely do. Yeah, I absolutely do. So I have a book that I wrote called Teach the Geek to Speak, and then there is an accompanying workbook. Essentially, the book Teach the Geek to Speak is a condensed version of the course. So if you don't get the course, then read the book, and then the workbook that goes along with it is helpful in just using that as a complementary aid to reading the book. And I wrote the book in such a way that is a short read. It's not coincidental that the book is, I think it's 93 or 92, 93 pages. Mm-hmm. I actually wrote not too long ago, maybe a week ago, about the fact that books are getting longer as time goes on. There's actually been studies on this, and that the typical business books have increased in number of pages.
Really?
And
okay.
Oh yeah, and when I was first developing the book, Teach the Geek to Speak, what I did was I went to Amazon and I looked at various business books, their reviews, but I didn't look at the 4 and 5 reviews. I looked at the 1 and 2 reviews. What do people not like about books? And the major complaint or criticism of a lot of books is that they're unnecessarily long. Yep. There's a lot of repetition and a lot of fluff in a lot of these books. So I wanted to make sure that the book that I wrote was not going to have a whole lot of fluff in it. It was very direct and to the point, because I figured that, at least for my target audience, who tend to be, engineers and scientists, that's something that they would appreciate. So yeah, absolutely. I wrote a book. I wrote a workbook to go along with it. So those are 2 things that I offer through Teach the Geek. And as I mentioned earlier, there's the course, Teach the Geek to Speak. And then there is the monthly membership, the Teach the Geek to Speak Society.
I love it. Now, for those that want to purchase the children's book, Ask Uncle Neil, or any of the other books, how can they, or have you come speak as well too? How can they connect with you and contact you to be able to do that?
Sure. So they can get the children's book at askuncleneil.com. And then the other book, Teach the Geek to Speak, and the workbook, you can find out about at teachthegeek.com. Although, if you were to go to teachthegeek.com, there's a link there that could take you to askuncleneil.com. So you could very well just go to teachthegeek.com and be able to get access to everything.
Oh, cool. That is truly, that is excellent. So we'll end the conversation this way, Neil. I want you to, if you could, to talk to those children out there that are like your nephew, that are curious and that have this question, why is my hair curly, or those other questions that that you might have been asked by your nephew. Talk to them and about asking those questions and how and why they should ask questions.
Oh yeah, you need to ask questions to gain understanding. It's not good enough to just do as you're told all the time. I get that, when you live in your parents' home, that typically can be the way it is. But I don't even think that should be the way it is, because ultimately you're raising children to be adults, and you don't want them to become adults and still have this mindset as do as you're told. Because oftentimes when you go into these corporate environments, you're going to be expected to take the initiative, but you don't have any practice doing that from when you were a child. It was all do as you're told. So you really should be encouraging your children to question things and to ask for to gain understanding, so that when they become adults, it's not something that they have to learn then. It's something that they've been doing this entire time. And when it comes to Black children, especially Leroy, I'm a big fan of what I'm about to say. I feel very strongly about it. Oftentimes you'll hear people say you have to see it to believe it. And I don't know what you believe or what you think when you hear that phrase, but oftentimes what I hear is Black children need to see somebody who looks like them, essentially another Black person, doing something that they want to do to be able to believe that they can do it. I hate that thinking, that mindset, because oftentimes what could very well happen is if you don't see that Black person doing the thing that you want to do, well, then you may not do it. And you stay in this waiting pattern, waiting to see this other person who may never show up. So yes, I wrote a children's book. Yes, I worked as an engineer, and there are other people out there that are like me who are engineers and may have written children's books. But what if you never come in contact with them? Does that mean you can't become an engineer? Does that mean you can't write a children's book? Absolutely not. You may come across other people who aren't Black who've written children's books, other people who aren't Black who've become engineers. So if they can do it, you can do it too, because they're not any better than you are. I feel that so strongly. I don't like hearing when people say we need to see another Black person doing something to think we can do it. You don't. As long as you see somebody else, that's good enough. There's going to be instances where you go into these corporate environments and you're going to be the only Black person there. That's okay. Wherever you are is where you're supposed to be. I was the only Black engineer at a lot of these companies I was at. In fact, I was the only Black engineer at all the companies that I was at. But so what? I thought that I was an engineer just like these other engineers, and they don't deserve to be there any more than I do. I did my work to the best of my ability, and I left that as it is. This whole idea of, well, I was uncomfortable because I didn't see a whole other Black people around. Well, that's what you got friends for. Go hang out with your friends. I mean, you don't have to be in these corporate environments and to see a lot of Black people to think that that's where you belong. You belong wherever you think you belong. I wanted to be an engineer. Well, actually, my father wanted me to be an engineer. I became an engineer, and I worked at these companies, and I did just fine. It wasn't a problem. Would it be great for more Black people to become engineers and scientists? That'd be wonderful. But as I said earlier when we were talking, I'm not a big fan of telling Black people go into engineering, go into science, because we're underrepresented in those areas. Yes, we're underrepresented in those areas. But what we should, at least I think what the message should be, is there's nothing off limits to you. There's going to be instances where you're going to be the one of very few, if not any, other Black people there. That doesn't mean you're not supposed to be there. That doesn't mean you didn't study the right things in school. You're where you are supposed to be. We can do anything that these other people, these other races, these other cultures are doing. And that's really what I want ingrained, really. If I want to, I'm not a big fan of telling anybody what to do, but I make exceptions. That's one of them. I want young Black children to know there's nothing off limits to us, and we can do anything that these other groups are doing.
I love that. I love that there's no limits to who we can be and what we can be. And if you don't see it, you can still achieve it. Think about, and I think about this. I mean, and we've said, your parents and others may have said it, growing up, that, that you could be president, you can be anything that you want to be. But if Barack Obama had that mindset that, well, there isn't anybody that's been there that doesn't look like me, I can't be there. And he got told by a whole lot of folks that he couldn't be, the president of the United States. But he said, in spite of that, in spite of what I see, I still believe that I can achieve and be what it is that I want to be. So that is truly a lesson, that we should definitely adhere to and understand that, yeah, there's strength in us seeing ourselves, because it does give people a sense of understanding and saying, wow, or showing our kids, hey, they did it, you can do it too. But even if they don't look like us, yeah, you can still be that what it is that you want to be. Not saying it's going to be easy, or easier, and more than likely it's going to be tougher for you because you may be the only one in there, like you said, and everything like that. But it does not mean that you put limits on yourself, and that's the thing, that we should be teaching kids. Take the limits off. Take the limits off.
Question. Absolutely, Leroy. I'm a big fan of that. And not only that, but you mentioned something that there are people that didn't think that Barack Obama should be the president, and told him so. There's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be people that think you suck, and they can think you suck for whatever reason. They could think you suck because you're Black, and they could very well tell you that to your face. But so what? You gonna let that stop you from doing what you want to do? If so, that's a shame.
Yeah. And last thing I'll say is I'm here in Baltimore, so I'm a big Ravens fan and a big Lamar Jackson fan. And they had been telling this young man that he could not be a quarterback when he first tried to cut, when he was being drafted into the NFL. Oh, you should be a receiver. Oh, you should be a running back. And the thing that his mother said to them, to each of those teams that would not draft him because he said, he wanted to play quarterback. And this is something that she said in the interview. She said, my son is a quarterback. He is a quarterback. That is all he's ever been. That is all he's ever wanted to be, is a quarterback. And he is proving everybody that has said that he wasn't a good enough quarterback, that he's good enough. So never put the limits on what what and who you can be as kids. And that was my my motivational post this morning. Never allow someone to tell you who you are, period. That you can't. Never allow someone else to tell you who you are. You be who you are, who you want to be, who you dream to be, and you work at it. So
absolutely, Leroy. I mean, who's going to know you better than you? Someone else is telling you better than you? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely. Neil, this has been fantastic. I appreciate, again, you taking time out to come and join us on the Author Showcase, the conversations with authors. It's been a joy. I get excited when I see children's book authors because I know what the importance of having children's books out there. And even more importantly, having children's book written by us so that they can, so that you can talk to, like you talk to your nephew. We can talk to our nieces and give them something that they can actually see that comes from us, and they can have an understanding. And like you said, and we have to nurture their curiosity, because when we nurture their curiosity, man, I think when we do that, they take the limits off. So I appreciate you, coming and joining me today, having this conversation, for doing and writing the book that you wrote, and thinking outside the box too, because being an engineer to writing the children's book, making that connection, I think is just awesome. So I'm glad your nephew asked you that question. Glad he asked.
Me too.
He asked you that question and was able to trigger something in you that I'm quite sure triggered something in him. And that's all that we can ask to do. And I think that's phenomenal. So one more time, give us your contact information where people can connect with you and purchase the book.
Excellent. So you can get the children's book at askuncleneil.com. And for those other books, if you're interested, Teach the Geek to Speak and the accompanying workbook, you can go to teachthegeek.com. And you can actually go to teachthegeek.com and still be linked to askuncleneil.com to buy the children's book.
Absolutely. This has been another episode, you all, of the Author Showcase, brought to you by the National Black Unity News. This is the latest issue that's out there. You can go get it. It has Neil Thompson in it, along with some of the other great authors that are part of the Author Showcase, but also other articles that are in this newspaper that I told you before, the topics and the learning that you're going to get from reading this newspaper is unlike anywhere else. So you can go to our website at www.tnbun.com and subscribe. You can also go to well, this is actually on our Facebook group page and see some of the other conversations and interviews that we've done. But then also you can go over to our YouTube channel, which is the National Black Unity News channel. You'll see this emblem, you'll see our logo, you'll see that on the page on YouTube, and you can see all of our episodes, our previous episodes that we've had of authors that have come on to the showcase. And it's just some great conversations with great people like Neil Thompson and all of the other authors that have come and just talk to us a little bit about who they are, their books, their mission, their message, their movement, and and their motivation behind writing their books. My name is Leroy McKenzie Jr. And as I always say, this is 2021, you all, and it's about leaving the familiar to elevate your influence. And what other way to elevate not just your influence, but your children, your nephews, your nieces, your nephews' influence by picking up a book for them, and you also picking up a book. Like Neil said, it's not just about our children reading, but it's about us reading as well. So grab a book. We thank y'all for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.